Hey guys, it's Taz101 Saga. I'm back again for another video already. Take that, Amazon Prime. That is how you do fast delivery. I'm going to talk about one of my favourite subjects, which is AEGs versus gas blowbacks. Now, people often have a very one-sided view of this. They're either in completely one camp or the other. So what I'm going to try and deliver today is a far more neutral approach on both. The reason I'm able to do that is because I use and enjoy both for different reasons. So that's something we're going to look at today. So what I've done here is I've picked out the pieces from my Airsoft collection that I tend to use the most and enjoy the most. When it comes to AEGs, I've tried to stick to assault weapons, if you like, even though I hate that term. I'm not going to include LMGs because they're in like a category of their own, and comparing an LMG to a gas blowback rifle is just really pointless. So a quick overview of what we got here, starting from left to right. We've got a Swick Custom / Cyma M16A1, which is of course an AEG. Then we've got my beloved custom Aries Thompson, which I rebuilt with a ton of real parts, which is an AEG. And then the centre we have a WE / Sapsford Custom 16A1 gas blowback. Next along is a Tokyo Marui MWS, which is an absolutely wonderful example of a gas blowback rifle. And then on the right we have a Ghk AKM. So this is really going to be quite a comprehensive look at the sort of things you're going to need to use both, and we're also going to bust a few myths along the way. And I'm hoping this is really going to help some people out. Let's look at the basics of an AEG and what stuff you need to run it, and then we'll compare it to a gas blowback. So here in front of us we have essentially everything you will need to operate and use an AEG at a skirmish. So starting from the left we have two magazines. Now there are two different kinds of mags, high caps and mid caps. Some people would say, well, there's also low caps, but low caps are operating from the same sort of system as a mid cap. The only thing that's different is the capacity. You do also have the auto winding drum mags, which you can get for AR platforms like this M16, although they tend to be more common with LMGs because that's really your only option when it comes to an LMG. So this is your standard sort of magazine that comes with an AEG when you buy it. This is a high capacity mag. So the way this works is you have a trap door at the top, a sliding door. You fill your BBs in there, anywhere from kind of 300 to 500 or more, depending on what style of magazine it is. Once you've filled it up to your desired amount, you close this, and then you're going to wind the wheel at the bottom, which winds the BBs up until they come up to the top here. Once you insert it in your gun, this is going to move back. It's going to hit the hop chamber, which is going to cam this backwards, and then your BBs are going to shoot up into the gun. Of course, when you remove the magazine, the BBs that were in the feed tube of the gun, they're going to drop a few BBs down. This is a mid-cap magazine. I don't actually use high caps, it's purely there for the video. This is what I personally roll with. They don't have such high capacity. For example, this is a new Prol 150 round mid-cap. Something you will need is a speed loader. So if you're going to run mid-caps, you'll need one of these two. So the way a speed loader works, you fill it with BBs through this door, a bit like a high cap mag, and then you're going to fill it up until you've got your desired amount. The nice thing about mid-caps is there's no winding. They're just like a real magazine. So if you're running mid-caps, you're going to need more of them to have the same volume of fire than with a high cap, because obviously they're less capacity. The huge benefit of these two is they're mechanically simpler because they don't have a whole winding mechanism, and they don't rattle. And when we get onto gas mags, all the rattly problems are non-existent. You don't have any windy wheels, no rattling whatsoever. As for your batteries, there are a lot of different battery options. I only use lithium ion. For example, I have Titan and my own site's Tesla batteries there. They work very well for me. A lot of people are into LiPo batteries. I've never been into those. Before I moved on to these, I was using nickel metal hydrate, which are often a lot larger and don't have the same mAh capacity. These things last forever. I really recommend Titan batteries, and to accompany it, I've got a Titan charger. So on the contrary, this is everything you will need to run and operate a gas blowback rifle. Exactly the same model of gun as the previous rifle, with any differences. This one's gas blowback. So that's the reason I've picked those two out, is because there's very little difference in terms of the external features. So in front of us here we have, again, magazines. This being a WE, you can get both the 30 round mags and the 20 round mags. Less options of course for capacity because it's supposed to imitate the real thing as much as possible. Loading a gas mag compared to an AG, pretty much the same, but any good speed loaders like this Tokin Rui will have an adapter on the bottom so you can load your magazines like such. Obviously BBs, I don't personally use 2.5s in gas blowbacks, that's literally just for show on the screen. And these are some of the gases I use, the different types for different seasons. And I put them in order from left to right of weakest to strongest in terms of PSI. So for example here we have Predator 144A. Now that's quite good for storage because it has a high silicone content, or if you're in countries where there's a lot stricter FPS rules like Japan, so this is ideal for stuff like that. This is kind of your basic green gas, so that's a kind of a standard example of your average airsoft gas. Next to along we have Brute Sniper gas, which doesn't contain any silicone or lubricant. It's definitely hits a bit harder than this. I can feel the difference in recoil and there's a slight increase in FPS. And here we've got Nupro 4.0, which is the hard hitting stuff, which is good for the winter, or something with a heavy bolt, steel bolt, it's quite good for that. The next step up still is CO2, that's your other option. You can get magazines like this, which will take CO2, just the same way as the CO2 pistol mags do. For example, this 1911, it just inserts either from the side or from the bottom, which is what you'll get on the Stag style mags. And you just tighten the screw, return the floor plate if there is one, and off you go. CO2 is very effective in cold weather, and you generally get a lot of shots off before you have to change it compared to gas. However, the con of CO2 is of course you can't top it off, and if you remove the 12 gram cartridge or 8 gram, those are also available, then you're losing whatever gas is left in there. Unlike regular gas and mag, which you can top off, the way you go about doing this is you take your magazine, you hold it upside down, just insert it in the valve there. Most gas mags, when they're full, the sound will either change or they'll start ejecting gas from the inlet down there. That's how you know that you've filled them up. And a good technique that I've learned along the way is don't hold the can down the entire time. Just do it in spurts, because that way you don't freeze the hole and you won't get like a lot of vapour ejecting, especially if you're gassing up a magazine on a cold day. But there are a lot of people that say that gas blowbacks are a lot of hassle. One of the reasons being that they argue is that you just need a lot of stuff, you know, you got to keep buying gas and you got to buy this or that. Partially true, although if you think about all the things you need to run an AEG like you just saw, you still need batteries, a spare battery, charger, magazines. Depending on what magazines you have, you might need several of them. It just depends, obviously. Airsoft's a bottomless pit, it's how much you want to spend. If you really want to enjoy the gas blowback experience, then this stuff will be worth it to you, and buying cans of gas for like a tenner a pop is going to be worth it to you. However, you will save quite a bit of ammo on BBs. So we'll look at some examples of magazines here. When it comes to airsoft gas blowback rifles and AEGs, including their magazines, there are of course a ton of options out there. There's very few general gun platforms which haven't been made in either platform now. Obviously AEGs still dominate in terms of popularity, magazine availability and the types of gun platforms that are available. There's some important things that need to be pointed out about gas magazines compared to AEG. So the beauty of the AEG mag, talking to mid-caps, is it's pretty much hassle-free. You just load it as I showed and you insert it, just buy a bunch of them and they'll generally feed. You can have issues with certain ones of these won't fit with certain brands of airsoft gun, but just do your research. If you go on Facebook, there's a whole bunch of posts and groups that will cover this sort of subject. This may be important for some people. It's not a big deal to me at all, but to some it may be important, and that's weight. Everyone talks about price, you know, and I'll get to price in a moment, but I definitely want to talk about weight because that's quite interesting. So I've actually weighed each of these and I'll discuss what they are. So if we start on the right, this is a Nupro 150 round mid-cap magazine. The weight of one of these magazines is 227 grams. So the weight of 5 of those AEG mags comparatively is 1,135 grams. Next up we have the WE mag, which is a gas magazine. Weight of a single one of these is 331 grams. 5 of those is 1,855 grams, so we can see the weight is starting to increase. So here we have the same type of magazine, a 30 round Stanag, for the MWS. Weight of a single MWS magazine is 485 grams. For 5, 2,425 grams. And on the far left here we have a Ghk AKM magazine, and that one is going to weigh 680 grams. A load out of 5 of those AKM magazines is 3,400 grams. So there's a big difference from, if we're talking loads of 5, 1,135 grams to 3,400 grams. Or if we're just looking at Stanags itself, 1,135 grams to 2,425 grams. So there's quite a difference between the weight. But if you're somebody that sort of struggles with the weight of things for whatever, it might be medical reasons, or you're just not a very fit or strong guy, then that might be something to consider. They do weigh quite a bit more than an AEG mag. The price, of course, is the main thing that people talk about. Something like this you can pick up for like 10 to 15 pounds. Maybe more if it's something snazzy like a G&P. We're only looking at sort of the standard Stanag aluminium magazines here. There's of course all the different P mags and everything, which for each category is going to weigh less than a metal mag. So 10 to 20 something pounds for one of these, even less if it's a plastic one, of course. Something like this you're looking at 40 to 50 quid a mag, depending on where you buy it. Most of these WE ones are about 40 quid in the UK, depending on where you find them. Again, Tokyo Marine mags are about the same, 40 to 50 quid. Ghk AK mags, again, about 50 quid. There's the availability side of it too, as well as the price. But generally, you know, you're looking at 250 quid for a load out of 5 of any of these. And that's just the way it is. Whereas for the same amount of money, you could buy a whole bunch of those. So it just really depends on, again, your budget. So we're looking at a price of an AEG versus a gas blowback. Obviously, price can vary pretty wildly depending on brand and platform of gun. So the AEG version of this, you can pick up a basic M4. Obviously, this is an old school A1 M16, but you can pick up your basic M4 with either the sort of A2 style round handguards, or you can have a standard Knights rail on there. A lot of those you can get for 100, 200 quid, and they're perfectly good AEGs out of the box really, if you just want to get stuck in, and you can upgrade as you go. Now something like this, you're going to talk about 300 and up just for the gun, so there's already a £100 price increase there. Factor in the magazines that we just looked at. For a load of 5, you're talking about 250 quid. So now you're getting on over 600 quid. When it comes to WE guns, which are very popular in the gas blowback market because they make so many different models, you're looking at having to upgrade it just to keep it durable, because they're getting a little bit of a dated design now in terms of how they actually function compared to more modern stuff that's come out more recently. So you're going to have to spend quite a bit of money on upgrade parts to actually keep them reliable and get them to function properly. So depending on which parts you go for a gas blowback, you're going to be looking at possibly another few hundred quid. Especially if you've got a more modern M4 variant and you're absolutely the sort of person that's going to want to put attachments on it. If you have to have that stuff and have a gas blowback, then you're looking at probably getting £1,000 at this point, depending on which bits you buy. All these prices I'm giving, they do vary quite a lot depending on what brand you're getting and what type of gun it is. Obviously it's going to vary, but as a standard rule of thumb, you are going to be looking at quite a bit more money for a gas blowback. If you just want to use something out of the box, like you just want the gun and the magazines and maybe a few little upgrades, for both platforms, yeah, the AEG is always going to be cheaper because the gun itself is going to be cheaper, and the cost of the additional stuff, especially magazines for an AEG, is significantly less. A very good starter gas blowback rifle that doesn't cost the earth is the Ghk G5. That is a really nice gun. I've got to fire it on a couple of occasions. A good friend of mine, Greg, I know you're probably watching, he recommends it too. It's a really nice gun that just functions well, and it's also reliable. So once again on top we have a Tokyo Marui M4 NWS Z system, which is Tokyo Marui's proprietary trigger box. On the bottom we have a Ghk AKM. When it comes to AK platforms, and that's more your thing, I really recommend Ghk. They make some really nice stuff. The reason I put these two out of here is, unlike the WE, which has dominated the market for years and years, is that these two, they will actually work out of the box, and they're reliable out of the box for a long period of time without needing replacement parts, at least in my experience. I have upgraded both of these, but the actual quintessential parts that are inside them, like the bolt carriers and the trigger mechanisms, I've not touched those, because those are the two parts which tend to break on most gas blowback rifles. It's always going to be something to do with the bolt carrier / nozzle or the trigger group. Those are the things that are going to go. And the reason this is important is because these two, they are more expensive if you're just buying the gun than if you're buying an equivalent platform from, say, WE or another brand. But what you actually get for paying that little bit of extra money is that you will actually get a gun that works out of the box, and then you can upgrade as you go, rather than having to buy something and pretty much upgrade it immediately so it actually works properly and can actually hit the broadside of a barn at a fair distance. When you're looking at upgrades, Ghk and Tokyo Marui, and also Ghk ARs as well, all of those weapons just have a ton of upgrade parts on the market. So does WE, but I'd argue that Ghk probably has the most, because whether it's their AR platforms or their AKs, they have all different parts for external accessories, nozzles, lightweight bolt carriers, steel trigger group upgrades, and anything you can name really. Although you're spending more initially, the gun just functions. It's kind of the same philosophy for spending money on whatever it is. You often get what you pay for, and that's definitely true with gas blowback rifles. So that really concludes my price point when comparing these to an AEG. Overall, yes, gas guns are going to cost more because you need more equipment to get them working, and obviously then you're going to be buying cans of gas on the regular, depending on how much you shoot, but as a general rule of thumb, yes, they're more expensive. One thing to note for people that are really wanting a gas gun, but they're not too concerned about it being a rifle and they don't really want to fork out hundreds of quid, there's other options out there. Although this video is mostly about gas blowback rifles, I thought this was an important thing to throw in, that the vast majority of your airsoft pistols, although you can get electric ones, most of them are going to be gas blowback. And in terms of how they function, in terms of the realism, this is just the same as the rifle. The controls are all, the same. You have your slide release, your hammer, your moving slide whilst you're firing. And if you want to take another step up, you can get a pistol, for example, this Action Army AAP01. You can get something like this and add a carbine kit. Those are available for all sorts, including common pistols like Glocks. So you can get a sort of a little middle ground there where you've got the sort of starting to get the feeling of having something closer to a rifle, but without the price of a rifle. You don't have to actually spend the earth to have a bit of fun with a gas gun. Right, so next thing, manual of arms. What do I mean by that? So the way you would operate this in terms of the controls on the gun and how it functions compared to an AEG. You're going to insert your mag, and then you're going to choose your fire mode, and then you're just going to fire on whether it's single shot or full auto. When the gun runs out, you're going to hear the sound change, and you're going to see that no BBs are coming out. You're then going to eject your magazine, going to insert your next magazine, and then you carry on. So that's really it. All you're really doing is changing the magazines and the fire mode when appropriate. It's really that simple, like there's nothing to it. There are models you can get like the Tokyo Marui new generation recoil shocks and some of the Bolt brand guns, I believe. The forward assist actually has a function, and the bolt catch here actually functions. Whereas on your basic kind of, say, G&G combat machine or your entry level AR platform, and AK as well, anything like the cocking handle, or the bolt catch and the bolt release and the forward assist, if it exists on that model of gun, doesn't actually function. It's literally just there for show, and it's all dummy parts. So let's look at the gas blowback version of the M16. The biggest appeal of these things really is, besides having recoil and not having what I a lot of people often describe as a very whiny gearbox sound, which just kind of ruins the immersion for a lot of people. So people like the realistic functions. The biggest single thing that's fun about gas blowback rifles for a lot of people is the fact that they have all the real controls. Now, the biggest difference to the gas blowback when it comes to loading it is you actually have to cycle the bolt carrier like a real gun to actually load the first round and cock the hammer. Imagine you insert the magazine and it's loaded. You've actually got to rack the action. Another thing that's different about these, if we flip it to the other side, is the safety can only be engaged if the rifle is cocked. So if we dry fire it now, and I try and put it on safe, it actually won't go. Mostly ARs, of course, will do this. AKs can go on safe, for example, whether they're cocked or not. But if we want to put it on safe, we actually have to rack the action. From there on, it's pretty much the same. You have your safe and then whatever fire modes come after that. The other thing that's different is a bolt catch on a gas blowback rifle actually functions. So on the last round, the bolt carrier, which of course actually cycles like the real firearm since it's a gas blowback, will actually lock back like that. What this now enables us to do, that when we change and insert to a fresh magazine, the bolt catch now actually becomes functional. We cannot insert a new magazine and continue to fire because nothing will happen. So this is where the bolt catch functioning is actually really fun for a lot of people, because you'll insert your next magazine and then you'll chamber the next round. You can of course use it as a manual lockback, just like the real firearm. And that's really the appeal of gas blowback, is all the controls are going to do the same thing. For example, even the forward assist actually operates. You can see there it's moving the bolt. An AEG, of course, you have to undo a whole bunch of screws to get the gearbox out. The number of screws and bolts is going to vary depending on what kind of gun and what model it is, but generally speaking, there's quite a lot of screws and bits to get through. So to remove this, just going to cock the action and safe it. Then we're going to pop out the body pins, just like the real thing. And then we can remove the bolt carrier, the charging handle which drops down. And if you want, you can also depress this pin here with a tool and remove the buffer and the buffer spring. Something that's also beautiful about a lot of gas blowback rifle platforms, particularly VFC is quite well known for it, and this WE for example, is they can actually accept a whole bunch of real parts without modification. For example, this is a real stock, real pistol grip, real handguards, and a couple other bits that are real still. They just went on without any modifications, done by the wonderful Josh Sapsford. God bless you, Josh, if you're watching. You did a lovely job. That's something that AEGs can't do to the same degree. They can take real attachments, for example, M-lock key mod and 20mm Picatinny rail attachments. If you're talking like actual parts like furniture, gas blowbacks are really king in terms of all that stuff. Just fitting on without mods. There's all different gas blowback systems out there, but the AR and the AK are probably the most prevalent. So the same philosophy. Gonna cock all that. All the parts just come apart. Super easy. The other beauty of this, besides it being realistic, is if you do have something go wrong with the internals of your gun, or you get a BB stuck somewhere it shouldn't, if you see how quickly I strip that down, you can do that in a dead zone. Try taking apart a gearbox in a dead zone. You're not going to, are you? If it's bad enough that it warrants taking it apart, it's actually possible. Another thing that you will get with gas blowbacks is, of course, the fact that they are more realistic in terms of they've actually got a moving bolt carrier and a lot of things going on, like you can see down there. There's a somewhat realistic trigger group, like that, which actually functions, of course, and has a Sierra disconnector and all the other parts. Something you can get is malfunctions that are somewhat similar to a real firearm. Now, I think it's quite important that people actually know what to do if there's a stoppage. So you have a magazine in, let's say you're firing, and then suddenly the gun goes click, click, click. You tilt the rifle to the right, kind of like you would with an AR, to see what the status of the bolt carrier is. It's only half travel, so that's as far as it goes, but say it stopped there, so you could see that it wasn't seated properly. and you looked in and you saw a BB like jammed above the chamber or something like that. This has never happened really in my experience, apart from with the WE when I was trying to get it to work properly, but it now does. But if this does happen, something that's important to do is don't cock it again or just try and hit that sucker forward, because all you're often doing is actually making the problem worse. The best thing to do is remove the magazine so any debris or broken BBs in there can actually fall out. Rack the action, do whatever you need to do, get your finger in there to remove anything. If it's really bad, of course, you can disassemble the gun like I showed to get those pieces out. That's just an important thing to note. But as long as you're working good, you can enjoy your recoil action. What we're going to do now is bust what I am considering to be something of a myth, although there is definitely some truth in it if you go back to the older style gas blowbacks like this WE. Gas blowback rifles do not work in the cold. The truth to this is the fact that if you go back in the day to this sort of system, the WE, which kind of was definitely the primary gas blowback rifle brand on the market for something like a armour-like platform, they do struggle in the cold more. The gases back then were not sort of available like they are now with stuff like the new Prol 4.0, and when I started Airsoft, open bolt, which doesn't mean what it means on the real firearm, where the action's at the back when it's ready. What it means on this is that the ejection port is open like a real firearm. When I started Airsoft, the thing that was popular was the closed bolt, which you can actually see the brass in there as opposed to it being open. Now, something that's important to note is that all the way from closed bolt to what we have now, like the MWS, which is a far newer system to this, is they have really gotten a lot more reliable, and that includes in the cold. If you want an AR that will just work all year round, and you're particularly in the market for an armour-like platform, I can't recommend the MWS enough. It's absolutely superior in cold temperatures and far more resistant to cooldown than something older like this WE. It's just come so far in terms of cold weather performance. Something that's important though is the overall gas efficiency in terms of how many rounds you can fire from one magazine before you have to re-gas it. That is going to go down in the cold no matter how good your gun is and what gas you're using, because that's just the nature of gas pressure in the cold. But the statement that you can't get a gas blowback rifle to work in the cold is total rubbish. Because if budgets are relevant and you can afford something like this, then you've got a gun that works in the cold, period. This thing simply does work in the cold, and there's no two ways about it. So to say that it's impossible, it just can't be done, is not true. It was definitely more true back in the day with the older systems, but now I'd say it's not a factor. A lot of people think that they're just not reliable in general, as in parts break a lot. Again, that's kind of highly based on what gun you get. If you pay more, you're going to get a better gun. Like when I put the MWS and the AK side by side, the reason I put those two together is those are the two I've had that have been utterly reliable. I've not had anything break on either of them. The reason that's changed so much is, for example, if you look at the WE's trigger mechanism, it's all very kind of, it's more realistic. It's actually got kind of the more realistic hammer. If you compare that to what TM has done with the proprietary Z system, it's less realistic, but you've actually got a far more functional gun because it's designed to function rather than look realistic. And the way the bolt catch works is just far more positive and effective than the older stuff like WE. So I think it's important to understand that for people that are probably more familiar with the older stuff and they've been playing Airsoft a while and they kind of assume nothing's changed. It's not true at all. It's the same with the magazines, you know, people say, oh, they leak all the time. Not if you take care of them and they're actually like, at the very least, like this is a Gen 2 WE mag. These are fine in my experience. I've never had one of these leak. I've gassed them up, fired them quite a lot, and I've never had a problem. Best thing to do is leave a couple of seconds of Abbey 144A gas because it's high in silicon content, or just leave a bit of gas with silicone in these things and just leave them in storage like that. If you leave them empty, yes, they will leak. If you're also one of these people that gets to the end of the game and for some reason feels the need to hold down
the valve at the back and therefore open it and release all the gas out the top. There's really no reason to do that, because it actually just freezes the rubber and then it shrinks. And then especially if you do that and leave it unloaded of gas for quite some time, I almost guarantee you when you try and fill it up, it's going to make a hissing sound. There are some magazines for certain brands of gun and just certain magazines that are quite notorious for just being crap, no matter what you do to them, but they tend to be few and far between. I've got a whole bunch of gas mags for various different guns and brands, and I've only had one of my Ghk mags leak. I'm not sure why it happened, but it was an easy fix. So just take care of your magazines. I definitely say if you want to go gas, then you're going to have to put in the effort to keep both the rifles clean and lubricated, and the magazines too. But if we're going to compare the reliability to AEGs, there's plenty of AEGs out there which are just very reliable and they just work well out of the box. They can of course be improved with upgrades, but that's kind of less important, I think, when it comes to an AEG versus a gas blowback, because most AEGs, they'll perform decently out of the box and you can just take them to a skirmish and have fun. Where there's a lot of gas blowback rifles, they do need a little bit of work and upgrades to really be as good as they can be. Do some drills if you can. My friend Greg says this is very important. If you really want to be as good as you can, because you are at somewhat of a disadvantage on paper because you have a much smaller magazine and a gun which is primarily going to be using in single shot versus people spraying high caps at you on full auto, drilling is quite important. And another thing that's important is just take care of the guns. It's not like an AEG where you can just unplug the battery, chuck it under the bed for months and nothing will probably happen to it. As long as your piston O-ring's not dry as a bone, then you're not going to have air loss problems either. Something like this, like I say, you can't just eject gas out of the magazines, just be careless and chuck them under the bed and then wonder why they leak when you get them out 2 months later. And you're not going to be able to fire this like endlessly and endlessly without having to clean and maintain something. And that's why upgrading is also important. You've got 30 rounds. You want these things to have as much range and accuracy as you can, so you have every advantage possible to go up against all the AEGs out there. Something I said during the introduction to this video was how a lot of users of AEGs or gas blowback rifles, they tend to be quite militant to their group a lot of the time. I even see quite a bit of narcissism, people throwing it at one camp or the other. There's a lot of people that they think gas blowback rifles are just utterly superior to AEGs, and AEGs are gay and all that kind of stuff. Something I wanted to push with this video is that there are advantages and disadvantages to both. I've talked a lot about gas blowbacks, but that's because I'm very fond of them. I do enjoy them overall, I'd say more than AEGs if we're just talking about kind of rifles, not including my LMGs. I absolutely love those. There's no reason you can't enjoy both. They both have their pros and their cons. Like an AEG, you just stick a battery in a mag in it and off you go, and you can just spray the bushes up and shoot to your heart's content, and that's very fun to some people. I could totally understand why people like playing like that. Now this is an important thing that I wanted to talk about, because regardless of whether it's gas or electric, if you really enjoy a certain platform of gun, then it's not going to matter too much to you. For example, this Thompson, yes, it is available in a gas blowback format. Generally speaking, although you can get them to work in the cold, AEGs are just going to work better. And since I use this with the World War II British loadout, which is a wool uniform, I tend to only use that in the winter, and therefore I use this in the winter, and therefore it made more sense to have an AEG. It's not to say that one system is entirely better than the other. In terms of pure practicality, to just put something together and go and shoot a load of BBs, of course the AEG comes out on top. But the reason people are really attracted to gas blowback, and the reason I was too, is it's just a little bit closer to kind of a real firearm, and I'm really interested in real firearms. I have been almost my entire life, so to have something that's as close as you can possibly get in terms of something that actually shoots BBs. It's also a seasonal thing for me. Like generally speaking, in the winter I use my AEGs almost all the time. If I really want to use a gas blowback, then I'll use the MWS at the top there, because that thing has insane cold weather performance for a gas blowback. I mean, if you're happy just with using AEGs and you don't care less about gas blowbacks and vice versa, then no one's got a right to tell you you're wrong. At the end of the day, we're all just playing a sport, and it's just what you enjoy. A gear consideration that I think is very important to note if you're running a gas blowback rifle. If you're not somebody who's specifically into doing like a historic loadout,
and you just want the latest high-speed plate carrier, taco pouches and stuff like that. Something like this is a Scorpion G-code magazine pouch. It's very effective, reason being, you don't have anything covering the top, but it will actually retain it if it's upside down. So the reason it's important is your magazine capacity is very limited. You're going to be reloading more often, so the less time you have that your gun is empty, i.e. changing magazines, the better. And a piece of kit like that can really speed up your reloads. In fact, I'd say it even does half the work for you. Another thing that's important is having a sidearm. A pistol really does help, especially if you're sniping and stuff like that, but just as much so I'd say if you're running a gas blowback rifle. Because the chances of your gun going empty, as in you're going to need to employ an emergency reload, the chances that that's going to happen is a lot more likely than an AEG. If you're using like a 150 round mid-cap, you could have fired 3/4 of that magazine and you'll still have the same amount left as a fully loaded gas mag. So the capacity does make a big difference. High-speed gear really makes a difference. So right now my rifle is empty. So if I knew this was going to happen, having a pistol you can very quickly draw is going to make a lot of difference. You might survive that, whereas if you had a holster that was kind of had a popper or just a Velcro, wasn't so quick, that extra second for that guy in that corner, he might take you out. Having gear that's really quick to operate, quick mag pouches, quick pistol transitions because of good holsters. For example, this one I have here is a Safariland with the QLS system. There's no push buttons or poppers or flaps or anything. It's just held in by tension. So if you want to really be all you can be, so to speak, some high-speed gear is something I would definitely recommend to get the most out of these platforms. There's another piece of equipment I'd really recommend for running a gas blowback or an AEG if you're somebody that actually likes to use your sights, especially if you're using something like, for example, this AK, where I'm not using any optics and the sights don't really sit that high above the barrel. Your bore axis is lower than obviously an AR with a red dot, where you're going to be talking a much more higher gap, so therefore you've got more room for a cheek weld. If you're a guy that likes to wear full face, I really recommend getting a mask that's like this one Tigress design, where the mesh is only on the front where it really needs to be, compared to the masks which are mesh all the way around. What this enables you to do is get a far better cheek weld. Now, cheek weld's much more important with a gas blowback because, again, you have that lower capacity magazine. You're going to need to make your shots count. You can't just hold the trigger down like with an AEG and just watch the BBs. Whereas if you have a gas blowback that's nicely zeroed, actually that goes for either gun. Just zero your guns, guys, because you can just put the sight straight on something, especially if you're using a nice quick red dot like the Vortex Spark AR that I have in my NWS. You can get those really quick shots. And that goes for AEG or gas blowback, but I'd argue it's much more important on a gas blowback. And a mask like this will definitely help you get a better cheek weld and speed up that whole process. Right, so that brings us to the conclusion and therefore the end of the video. My conclusion, I really enjoy both. If I had to pick one when it comes to rifles, I'd definitely go to gas blowback, but I'm not in that position. I have the luxury of choosing either and enjoying and owning both. I hope what this video has done is it's cleared up a few things for people which might be new to the whole choosing a type of gun kind of thing, whether it's electric or gas, or people that are looking at AEGs but also considering a gas blowback, or they're just wanting to make the move. It's really just my take on things that are important to me and things that I enjoy about both and some potential pros and cons that you might have run into. The main one, of course, I think is going to be price. That's probably the one that's going to make a bit of difference to people when it comes to actually buying something. Obviously, price tends to matter. So that brings us to the end. If anyone's got any comments or questions, feel free to post them down below. And as always, please also feel free to rate, comment and subscribe. And there will be more content on the way soon. And I'll give you a little spoiler alert. I'm going to do a video on LMGs and why I think they're freaking underrated and awesome. So that being said, thanks for watching, take care, stay safe, and I'll see you soon.